Welcome to today's Explainer. Look, if you've been paying attention to the news lately, you've probably noticed a really strange and honestly kind of dangerous disconnect. On one hand, we've got these booming economic headlines, but on the other hand, we have the harsh financial reality that millions of families are actually waking up to every single day. On the surface, things look incredibly resilient, but underneath, the foundation is absolutely cracking. So let's dive right in and unpack the silent collapse of the American consumer.
Starting off with the illusion of normalcy, basically what we see on the surface versus what's actually happening out there. Think of the economy right now like a giant iceberg. Look above the waterline and hey, everything feels totally fine, right? You see packed flights, full restaurants, and a stock market that just keeps climbing. But if you look beneath the surface, it's a completely different story. Everyday Americans are quietly running out of money. Savings are just disappearing, and credit card debt is literally spiraling into a vortex.
To understand why that hidden debt is such a massive deal, we need to look at America's economic engine and what we call the 70% rule. Okay, here is the absolute crucial vulnerability. Roughly 70% of the entire U.S. economy depends on one thing: everyday Americans swiping their cards. That's huge. This whole machine doesn't run primarily on factory production or government spending. It runs on you and me. Every new car, every online order, every quick dinner out, that is the literal fuel keeping the whole engine alive.
When this works, it's a beautiful, continuous cycle. You know how it goes. Workers earn paychecks, consumers go out and spend that money, businesses make a profit, and then those companies turn around and hire more workers. Simple, right? But there is a fatal flaw here. This entire four-step machine completely seizes up the very second consumers run out of cash.
Which brings us to the savings and debt trap. How exactly we went from financial cushions to relying on credit cards. It's wild to think this drastic shift in wealth happened in just a few short years. Back during the pandemic, savings surged. Stimulus checks were rolling in, and with travel and entertainment totally shut down, families actually had some real financial breathing room. But that post-pandemic cushion, yeah, it's been drained fast. All that extra cash has vanished, forcing folks to walk a really dangerous financial tightrope. And that brings us to a really harsh reality. People aren't spending right now because they're financially comfortable. They're spending because they are just trying to survive. As families are forced to turn to debt simply to buy groceries or keep the lights on, credit card balances have climbed to record highs. And with interest rates being as brutally expensive as they are right now, a balance that maybe felt manageable yesterday suddenly snowballs into an inescapable trap. Now, we really need to clear up a massive misconception here. You constantly hear the news cheering that inflation is slowing down. And a lot of people naturally assume that means things are getting cheaper. They aren't. Slowing inflation just means prices are crushing you slightly slower than they were last year. The prices don't actually go back down. The financial damage is already done, and families are feeling that squeeze on literally every single trip to the supermarket. So, what happens next? Let's look at the corporate domino effect that gets triggered when the consumer finally pulls back. It creates a really vicious chain reaction. Once consumers finally get squeezed tight enough that they become cautious and buy less, well, corporate revenue slows down. And management? They panic. That panic leads straight to hiring freezes, budget cuts, and eventually layoffs. And the cycle doesn't just stop there, because newly unemployed workers spend even less money. It becomes this self-fulfilling downward spiral. Because here's the thing, this is exactly how economic slowdowns begin. The truly terrifying part is that the economy often looks its absolute strongest right before the cracks become visible. People keep up appearances, swiping those cards while the pressure builds quietly beneath the surface. It happens slowly at first, and then once confidence collapses, it happens all at once. By the time the headlines actually declare a slowdown, the damage is already fully baked in. Which leads us to our final warning today, the undeniable cracks in the foundation. We are now seeing rising loan delinquencies across the board, and I cannot stress enough what a massive red flag this is. Americans are increasingly falling behind on car loans, credit cards, and all those buy now, pay later apps. The margin for survival is shrinking drastically. Households are stretched so incredibly thin right now that just one blown transmission or one surprise trip to the ER can literally collapse a family's entire financial ecosystem. Add in the whole housing lock-in effect, and it gets even worse. With mortgage rates staying elevated, buying a home is completely out of reach for a lot of people, which keeps them stuck in the rental market. This artificially high demand keeps rent prices elevated, which just siphons off whatever tiny bit of disposable income families had left. And less disposable income means even less fuel for the broader economy.
When you stack all of these pressures together concurrently, we're talking exploding debt, persistently high inflation, punishing interest rates, insane housing costs, and entirely depleted savings. The picture becomes crystal clear. The American consumer is completely exhausted. The damage is building quietly beneath the surface, but it's heavily masked by a stock market that looks totally fine to the casual observer. So, the reality is, if everyday consumers buckle, they take the entire economy down with them. I'll leave you with this final thought for today's explainer. As we look at all these hidden cracks in the foundation, are ordinary people about to trigger the next major economic crisis? Or is the system somehow stronger than the math suggests? Keep your eyes on the data, folks. Thanks for joining me to unpack all this today.